Can the Baltimore Ravens pick up their second straight prime time victory? We talk about that and so much more coming up on this crossover edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes an audio form, anywhere you get your shows, also in video form on YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. We're back here. It's a Thanksgiving edition episode. Of course, we do 5 days a week, every single week. So that includes on holidays like Thanksgiving. I want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. I hope it's filled with fun, family, food, football, obviously. And I'm very thankful for everybody who shows support here to this show, to the channel. It's been amazing watching this thing grow. And of course, it's credit to everybody who tunes in. So thank you. Of course, I'm also thankful for friends, family, everybody who has helped me get to this point. So we have a lot to talk about. It's crossover Thursday. Ravens play the Chargers on Sunday Night Football. We'll talk with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers about the biggest storylines, the key matchups, and some predictions in there as well. So let's talk about it now.
Thank you so much for coming on, man. I'm excited for this one. I guess I'm excited. I mean, I'm a little bit scared for this one for sure, but I'm happy to be here with you. You're one of my favorites.
I appreciate that. You're one of mine too, Daniel. It's always fun talking with you. And two good teams. I know the Chargers record will not say that. And I know the coaching situation right now in Los Angeles is not the best. But I always get so intrigued by the Chargers because they have so much talent on that roster on both sides of the ball. But it just seems like, and we've talked about it, the Brandon Staley era, which for some reason is continuing here.
Yeah.
I just don't understand it. But I think Sunday night between these two teams maybe has the potential to be a sneaky good matchup.
Yeah, it could. I mean, like the Chargers, I mean, all they've done is lose one-score games, right? They've only lost by 2 scores once, and it was against the Chiefs in a game that was probably closer than it seemed by the final score. But this one has a tendency to go a lot of different ways, or like has the possibility of going a lot of different ways. But Kevin, I'll be jealous, just about the fact that you get to cover one of the teams that can't really be disputed as a good team right now. The Ravens have, had some weird losses, obviously, but hard to, argue with what their record is at this point in the season. They're one of the top teams in the AFC. So going into this Sunday night football matchup, a game that'll be pivotal for them for, number one seed consideration and things like that. What do you think is the biggest story for your team right now?
Yeah, I think coming off a Thursday night win against the Bengals, it's been about the rest so far. And what I mean by that is the Ravens have had a pretty brutal travel schedule. They had to go abroad to London, play the Titans in week 6. They had to come back to M&T Bank Stadium, blew out the Lions in week 7. Had to go back to the West Coast, play Arizona in week 8, back to Baltimore for another game in week 9 against the Seahawks, which, again, another blowout there. But they'll be traveling to the West Coast in this one again. But the Ravens, after that Thursday night game, they have the mini bye leading up to this. And even it's a bigger mini bye because you go from a Thursday night to a Sunday night instead of a Thursday night to a Sunday at 1 p.m. game.
Sure.
But then after this game, they have their actual bye. So it's one game in 24 days for the Ravens, which at this point in the season is a blessing because everybody's dinged up at this point in the year. Everybody has injuries that are little things that they can get cleaned up with maybe a week of rest, a week and a half of rest. So while my sweet spot is usually like maybe week 9, week 10, week 11, this stretch of rest, especially with some of the injuries Baltimore's gone through recently, from week 1 to week 3, they lost like 12 starters. It was a brutal stretch, something I know, Daniel, we've said here on Locked On Ravens for the past 4 seasons with the Ravens and their injuries. But they've been pretty healthy up until about week 9, week 10-ish. And then they started to lose guys again. So Lamar Jackson gets injured in that Bengals game. Logan Wilson actually injured Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and Odell Beckham Jr. But John Harbaugh, Lamar Jackson, adamant the ankle is fine. We'll kind of monitor practice throughout the week with that, obviously, as it continues. And then Odell Beckham with a shoulder. Really wasn't able to move it. And John Harbaugh saying it's not a long-term thing. I, again, refer to the injury report on that to see if he'll play in this game or not. But for the Ravens to have the rest that they do and to be in a position where they're 8-3 and they don't necessarily look, they want to win this game against the Chargers. I'm not saying they don't want to, but if they lose it, it's not the end of the world. Their season is not over, and they're still in a position to, one, win the AFC North, and two, have a shot at that top seed in the AFC, which right now at least seems like a two-team race between the Ravens and the Chiefs.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously in the AFC North now too, you have two starting quarterbacks done for the season. Joe Burrow, shifts things dramatically in the North, right? Deshaun Watson, maybe less so because that team can win without him, right? I mean, but at the same time, yeah, this week, a couple of, their top pass catchers potentially off the table for the Ravens. We know Mark Andrews isn't going to play this week. Odell Beckham, we'll see about that later on in the week, but I do think, yeah, that is helpful for the Chargers. It does still feel like a game where, Zay Flowers could go for like 180 just to dunk on Chargers fans a little bit more. What does it feel like to blow out a team? I don't know. I don't remember the last time the Chargers did. No, I mean, the Chargers have, blown out a couple of really, really bad teams. But I think the biggest story for them is just, will their defense give them a chance, right? Because I think what you've seen is 3 out of their 4 wins this season have come against backup quarterbacks. It was Aiden O'Connell with the Raiders. Right now, he's their starter, but still, Jimmy G was the guy at that point, right? Then you have the Tyson Bagent Chicago Bears game, the Zach Wilson, who just got benched game against the Jets in that one, and those are 3 of their 4 wins. They did beat Kirk Cousins, but going into this one, every single good offense the Chargers have played has pretty much diced them up. The Cowboys game is the exception there, but 36 points, 536 yards allowed against the Dolphins in a loss, 31 and 483 allowed against the Chiefs in a loss, 41 and 533 yards allowed in the loss to the Lions. Find me another team that's given up 483 as far as total yardage more than once so far this season. So, I mean, Justin Herbert has been playing like an MVP. We'll talk more about him, but I think for the Chargers, just a team that gives up the most passing yards in the NFL against a Ravens offense that ranks 5th in points per game, 9th in yards per game. It's can they give him a chance? Brandon Staley kept his job this week, which is a surprise to a lot of Chargers fans. It's what the Chargers normally do. They don't fire coaches midseason. If they were going to do it, it felt like it would have been after the loss to the Packers. Hard to blame them for a loss to the Ravens this week if that's the way things end up going down. But when I look at this matchup, it feels like it could turn into a blowout. The Ravens have a really good defense. They have an offense that has blown out the Lions, blown out the Seahawks. And to me, it's just, hey, can Brandon Staley, with his job still right, come up with a game plan, get this team together against a good offense? I have my serious doubts about it.
And, you mentioned the one-score games, Daniel. You mentioned some of the troubles they've had closing them out. Well, the Ravens have been one of the teams where you can even go back to last year a little bit. I'm sure you've seen a graphic or two here and there. Yep, the Dolphins game last year was bad. The Giants, etc. They've been a team that has blown some fourth-quarter leads, has had some self-inflicted mistakes, and every team does to an extent.
Yeah.
But I think Baltimore's earlier in the season hasn't been an issue as much as of late. But we saw the 13 penalties against the Texans in week 1. They had the 7 drops against the Steelers in week 5, 4 fumbles on 4 straight possessions in week 3 against the Colts. So they've kind of had these things where the whole conversation is, well, they should be 10-0 or they should be 9-1. And at this point, your record is what it is. It's the what it could have, should have of the league. Every team has that. But for the Ravens, they are a dominant team with those mistakes. But at this point, as we now head further and further into the season, these aren't trends that, aren't sure. We're not sure about them. That's an early season thing where
agreed.
The penalties, that was a week 1 thing. They've cleaned it up for the most part. Every team has good and bad games with penalties. The one thing I will say has been a trend for them has been the fumbles. Lamar has 10 on the season through 11 weeks. Didn't have one last week, so that at least is a start.
Yeah.
But that he's had some issues with the mesh point with some of his running backs, Justice Hill in particular. But even despite that, the Ravens have gone on a tear here with their offense, which with the new system, with Todd Monken, they bring in new weapons, Odell Beckham Jr. and Zay Flowers. There was always going to be a ramp-up period here. It wasn't going to be like the Ravens were going to blow out every single team by 40 points from week 1 to week 18. But they've now been on a stretch where over the last 5 weeks, they've scored over 30 points. So they've had some consistency in their offense, and that paired with their defense, which has been playing out of their minds this year. You talk about, I do yards per attempt in terms of how I grade, but the Ravens are 6th in passing right now. They're actually, they're 1st in passing right now. I was looking at offense. They're the number 1 pass defense in the league. And yards per attempt wise, it doesn't look great because they have had teams run up and down on them a little bit over the last 2 weeks. They're 21st in the league. But these past 2 weeks rushing the ball, teams have been able to out-physical them a little bit at the line of scrimmage, Cleveland in particular. So maybe that's one area I'm looking at, as can the Ravens bounce back? It kind of happened a little bit in the first half of that Cincy game. Obviously, Joe Burrow goes down. And sure, that changes the complexion of what a game looks like. But
sure,
I do think that it's impressive because without Marlon Humphrey for a lot of these games, he missed a bunch of games early in the season, missed last week as well. Brandon Stevens has stepped up to, Stone as the Ravens interception leader, not necessarily household names stepping up for them, but they're getting contributions from stars and also role players, and it's been big for them.
Yeah, and for the Chargers, I mean, if you actually felt like you had a guy, well, first of all, as far as like I don't think they're going to get run all over. The Chargers have one of the worst rushing attacks in the league. They're not going to out physical the Ravens. I don't think that's going to happen. But in the larger sense of things, Brandon Staley kept his job. You have the ultimate test in front of you. You have a chance to change the narrative. You have a chance to beat the first team you beat. That's a really good team since the 2021 season. It's the Dolphins last year. That's the last good team they beat. That's the last playoff team that they beat, right? The only team they beat. They were 1-6 against playoff teams. You have a great opportunity to show that this defense is good and that you're making improvements, all those things this week. We'll see if they're going to do it. But that's a really, really hot offense coming into town, coming off a mini bye week. We saw what the Detroit Lions did off an actual bye week against the Chargers. They went out there and put up 41 and just had a counterpunch for every punch the Chargers had offensively. And I feel okay about the Chargers offense, at least being able to do something with Justin Herbert playing at the level he is right now. Defensively, though, I think is the biggest question going into this one. But you talked about Brandon Stevens. You talked about that secondary. Keenan Allen versus that secondary is going to be one of the best matchups in this game. We're going to get into the other best matchups and the most important players in this game coming up right after this.
First, this episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chargers is brought to you by PrizePicks. And if you're looking for daily fantasy sports, look no further than PrizePicks. PrizePicks is awesome because it's the most fun. So many have happening, up to 25 times their money this football season. All you have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less than their projected stats, and place your entry. And if you're a basketball fan with basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. So that's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players for different sports or leagues. For example, if you're a big LeBron James fan, you can pick LeBron James and maybe Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. And if you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meat Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can do that. You can now find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. And PrizePicks offers a really cool reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
I'll tell you one thing, Kevin. Meek Mill does not want the smoke from me on PrizePicks. I love my PrizePicks. But let's get into the rest of the biggest matchups. We talked about the biggest storylines for this one, and I think there are some really good matchups. I'll start here because I think really the one thing that has a chance to turn this game sideways, right, to keep it from being competitive, to really decidedly give the Ravens a gigantic advantage going into this one, is the Chargers offensive line versus the Ravens pass rush, because they're going up against a loaded front, which Davian Clowney, Adofe Owe, Kyle Van Noy, obviously, who was a Charger in 2022. That trio has been great for the Ravens. They lead the NFL in sacks with 44 going into week 12. And what we have seen from the Chargers specifically over the last couple of weeks is, hey, if with a healthy Justin Herbert, if you give him enough time, if you just even give him a chance to kind of maneuver around in the pocket and just don't have multiple guys losing their one-on-ones on any given snap, like he'll be able to navigate it, find plays down the field, and make some things happen. But if they don't, it's really, really tough for this offense to get going, and especially without a really rushing attack to kind of keep the Ravens off balance. Like, I think this is the biggest matchup for the Chargers going into this one.
Yeah, it's a huge one. And I'll talk a bit about, when you talk about the Chargers offense versus the Ravens defense, I'll move into, a little bit specific player-wise with, I think Keenan Allen is somebody that we know he is the Chargers passing offense right now. No Mike Williams, no Josh Palmer. So you have Quentin Johnston, but unfortunately we all know.
Don't talk about Quentin Johnston.
we all know what happened. I'll leave it at that. We all know what happened. But Keenan Allen has been dominant for the Chargers. I know it did have a case of the dropsies on Sunday. That's a thing.
That's true.
But he's been as solid as ever. He's kind of carried that passing offense for years now. You can't deny him as one of the better receivers in this league. And for the Ravens, depending on if Marlon Humphrey is back or not, obviously, I don't think we'll know that until closer to game time.
Yeah.
But you have guys like Brandon Stevens stepping up for them. You have guys like Arthur Millette, who they brought in from Pittsburgh, who's played really well in the slot. So depending on where the Chargers want to line him up, they have guys to throw it. Even Ronald Darby has played well for the Ravens this year in spurts. So we'll see what happens with the corner matchup on Keenan Allen. I know we're kind of far away from the days of Revis Island and shadowing guys with one specific player, but Allen is someone who you have to account for in this offense, because if you can shut him down, I think it limits the Chargers' options despite Justin Herbert. And I think he's a good quarterback. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But it does limit who he has the ability to throw to, because they are down so many without Mike Williams, without Joshua Palmer. So I'm intrigued to see how the Ravens kind of throw coverage at Keenan Allen and maybe say, hey, you know what? We know that Keenan Allen can be a guy who beats us. We dare you to beat us with someone else.
And that should be every team's game plan going up against the Chargers, right? Because, I like, even against Marlon Humphrey, I like Keenan Allen against any of those dudes one-on-one, if the Ravens were willing to leave it at that, right? If you're willing to leave Keenan Allen because of the way the Chargers have been able to use motion and find different ways to free him up, get him free releases off the line of scrimmage, and just be able to go. Because the thing is they're targeting him down the field more now. So it's what's really killed DBs against him this year is they always expect him to go to the sticks, because he's one of the best third down converters in the entire NFL. But now when he's opening things up and he'll turn that field and you're trying to play the sticks, that's a problem for other teams. The problem is for the Chargers, they don't have anyone else that can step up and be a legitimate receiving option outside of him. An NFL capable, above average to average receiving option. We saw last week Quentin Johnston isn't there yet, right? It's going to take more time with him. He was always going to be a project to a certain extent. There's ways they can use him, but when you're talking about just the one way you could slow down the Chargers offense, obviously sacking Justin Herbert, not giving him time, is number one. The second most important thing is trying to slow down Keenan Allen, because the dude has been on absolute fire this year. He's been a top 5 receiver in the NFL this year by any metric you want to look up. And over the last couple of games, 21 catches, 291 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That is what Keenan Allen's capable of. Everyone knows it's coming, and he's been able to do that anyways against the Detroit Lions off of a bye, and obviously last week against the Green Bay Packers, who went into that game with one of the better, pass defenses in the NFL. So I like Keenan Allen's matchups. If they're going to take him away, double team him, just throw everything at him, that's a great way to slow down this Chargers offense. But let's get into the most important player, because that was my other most important matchup, was Keenan Allen versus Brandon Stevens and Ronald Darby and whoever they want to throw up against him, because Josh Palmer will miss at least one more game on injured reserve. Let's talk about the most important player here, Kevin. Who do you think that is? Can it be anyone other than Lamar? What is it?
I know it is Lamar, but I always try to switch it up, because the obvious. It's
very hard not to go Justin Herbert every week. Yes,
yeah, exactly.
I understand.
So
that, yeah.
I always want to give a player that I feel like maybe is getting a little less love than he should be. And I think this guy's getting a ton of love, and as he should be. But Justin Madubuike for the Ravens has been incredible as an interior pass rushing presence. Yeah. And I think in today's league, it's kind of hard to find consistent interior rushes, especially from a player like Madubuike, who I think Ravens fans, people who cover the team, have been predicting a breakout for a while from him. This is a contract year, so of course it happens in the contract year. But he's had 9.5 sacks for the Ravens so far this season. He's incredible. And he works out with Aaron Donald in the offseason. So maybe you're getting some of that Aaron, some of that Aaron Donald trading going on. But the crazy part about it is the Ravens haven't really had a pass rush over the last 6 or 7 years, to the point that they're getting with Madubuike. The Ravens had 48 sacks in all of 2022. They have 44 as a team this season. Yeah. They're 4 off their total from last year. And that's not just a Madubuike thing. Jadeveon Clowney has stepped up. Old friend for you guys, Cal Van Noy has played really well for them. But the Ravens have not had a double-digit sack guy since Terrell Suggs back in 2017. So they are probably going to get that, I'd assume, unless it goes the Justin Houston route. What happened with Houston is he had 9.5 sacks through 9 sacks through 7 games. Yeah. Got a half sack the rest of the season, but it finished with 9.5. So Madubuike has been awesome. He is lightning quick. He has moves, and he's been a big part of what they do. And I know you say you picked Justin Herbert. if I had to pick an important player for the Chargers, of course, I'll throw it to you, but I always have to mention Derwin James on Chargers shows because he was the big what if for the Ravens back in that 2018 draft when they traded out. They took Hayden Hurst. They obviously got Lamar by trading back into the first round. But I think every team wants to have some sort of a Swiss Army knife. The Ravens have it with Kyle Hamilton, and I think for Derwin James, he's kind of that guy for the Chargers defense.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people have been on Derwin James this year. Well, I think it's, a lot of different things. Like, I think he's been slowed down by the amount of unnecessary roughness penalties he's had. He's had 4 different, helmet-to-helmet or hitting high kind of penalties this year, and to the point where they're looking for him to do it, right? Like, he has a reputation at this point. Like, there was a hit in the last week against the Packers game where the receiver took a shot over the middle from a Packers defender. It's like Derwin James gets a flag on that 100 out of 100 times, right? But now, because he has that reputation, is he playing a little slower because of that? Is he a little bit, more thinking when he's trying to hit someone instead of just doing what Derwin James does best and just letting his natural athleticism, right, and just playmaking ability take over? It's hard to say. I think the hard thing for the Chargers, they have 2 guys who are better fit at strong safety with Alohi Gilman and Derwin James, both really playing to their strengths up near the line of scrimmage. That has affected him a little bit. Dean Marlowe has been a veteran that's come in on the back end and helped a little bit, but it's hard because the Chargers secondary is a mess. How much of that has been Derwin James? He's a portion of it. He's nowhere near the biggest problem, but it hasn't been the dominance that we've seen from him. It's not an all-pro season this year for Derwin James. And I think for the Chargers, I would have been Keenan Allen or Justin Herbert you'd pick for this. Both have been equally important to them, but I think the thing about the Chargers and Justin Herbert specifically is Justin Herbert's played like an MVP the last 2 weeks. They still lost, right? He's fully healthy now. He's using his legs, had the second most rushing yards he's ever had in a game last week with 73. But the problem is now, Kevin, it's like when he plays like that and you still lose, how can you win? How can you feel good about this game unless he's playing that way, right? So it feels like for the Chargers to have a chance in this game, you have to have MVP Herbert at minimum and then some, right? And it's still going to take some more after that. And we're going to get into that and what we think is going to end up deciding this game in a game that the Chargers need if, they want to prove people wrong, keep their season alive, I guess. We're going to talk about that coming up right after this. Back here with one of the best crossover episodes of the season. Daniel Wade, Locked On Chargers. Kevin Oestreicher, Locked On Ravens. Very excited to be here for this one. Love crossover Thursday as always, but Locked On has another really cool thing going on because they have launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts that only Locked On can give you, plus the national shows covering every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe for the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So it's funny for this one, Kevin, when I was thinking about, we're recording this a little earlier in the week, but when I'm thinking about what the Chargers can do to win this game, especially reeling after losing to a bad Packers team, right? One of the guys who popped into my mind was a host of Locked On Titans, Tyler Rowland, right? Because he recently put out a graphic about how the Titans could beat the Jaguars, not having much faith in them. And it was something like collecting all 7 Dragon Balls or, finding a mysterious lamp that has a genie in it that can grant you 3 wishes. Shout out Tyler Rowland. But it does kind of feel like that's the case for the Chargers going into this one. They're going to be underdogs in this game when things are all said and done and the dust settles. You do get the Ravens at home, which is probably better than going to the East Coast and going to Baltimore. But still, it feels like, we'd have to see a lot of things we haven't seen from the Chargers this week to beat the Ravens on Sunday Night Football. And there's a chance that if things don't go right, if things start to tailspin, the Chargers could get embarrassed on national television this week. It's plain and simple like that. They have to play a good game, and they also kind of have to just play the best game they've played so far this season. But when you're looking at what you want the Ravens to do this week or what kind of the path to victory looks like, what does it look like to you?
Yeah, there are a couple different things. I think the main one, which we talked about earlier in the show, was when the Ravens have lost their games, for the most part, they've been self-inflicted mistakes. Now, I will give credit to Cleveland because in the second half of that game, they just wanted it more. And that was Cleveland beating Baltimore, not Baltimore beating Baltimore. But they allow teams sometimes to hang around and kind of get the game super sloppy and super ugly.
Turn it into a street fight, sure.
Exactly. And that's what I think for the Ravens, they have to avoid. They have to get off to a strong start. Maybe I always say like a 14-3, 10-0, like one of those leads.
Yeah.
Because then it forces the other team to come from behind, and some teams are better at that than others. But against this Ravens defense, and
And
again,
it
for
lets
the
the
most
Ravens
part,
play to their strengths offensively,
yeah,
right? Like they're not
exactly.
trying to play from behind.
No, and I think the thing with this Todd Monken offense versus what we've seen or what we saw from the Greg Roman days in Baltimore was that Ravens team was always, we're going to have these 10-minute drives. They're going to be 15 plays. We're going to take up all the clock.
Right.
But this Todd Monken offense is we'll go 80 yards in 4 minutes and 5 plays and just, score a touchdown, and that'll be that. And that's how that game against Detroit in week 7 was over by the middle of the second quarter. The Lions had 6 fourth down attempts in that game because they had to go for it every single time because they were up like 28-0. The Ravens were in the middle of the second quarter. So if the Ravens can get off to a fast start and avoid the Chargers having any sense of, we're close in this one, we're right there, we can come back. For some teams, that can be a sentence where you start to maybe feel yourself get a little heavier. You
Starts
start
creeping
to
in.
You start to give in a little bit.
Especially for a team that has the nightmares, right? That has the Sunday scaries that the Chargers have, where it's like you've seen it play out before with them, right? And and it's hard to say that these players aren't thinking about that when these things get a little tight, when the game gets late on both sides, right? Because like for the Ravens, it's like, oh shoot, we have given up a few fourth quarter leads, right? How do they start feeling when things get close like they did in the Browns game, who you said wanted it more? And I think on the flip side, inversely to that is just, the Chargers hang around, right? Give yourself a chance. Hang around, be around the game, and keep it close enough in the fourth quarter to where you give yourself a chance. But I think to me, Kevin, it comes down to this. Like, for the Chargers to beat a team that's much better than them, it takes a certain kind of great game script, which is for them, get ahead, right? Get the Ravens a little less out of their comfort zone than they would have been in years past, obviously, in the Greg Roman offense, where it's like run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. But make them one-dimensional to a certain extent, right? The Chargers' run defense has to be lights out. They've been lights out most of the season, but they went against Detroit, and they got shredded, right? And that was a huge reason why Detroit was able to put up 41 in that game. But for the Chargers to beat a better team, which the Ravens 100% unequivocally are, red zone and turnovers. That's it for me. Like, if the Chargers want to give themselves a chance, they have to be better offensively and defensively in the red zone than the Ravens are. The Chargers went 0 for 3 in the red zone last week, a huge reason why they lost, and they had been one of the best red zone offenses in the league, one of the only red zone offenses better than the Ravens red zone offense. But that's me. If you can turn a couple of Ravens touchdowns into Justin Tucker field goals, that's huge for them, right? If you can win the turnover margin, that's huge for them. The Chargers have lost the turnover battle the last couple of weeks, and if you looked at what you were saying about the Ravens, every single Ravens loss has come with 2+ turnovers, right? Or 2+ giveaways, I should say, by that Ravens offense. So I think it is inversely the exact opposite script for the Chargers, where it's like, hey, hang around in that fourth quarter. Maybe you can come from behind to win this game, and also win in the red zone, win in turnover battle.
Yeah, and I will say that we know for the Ravens, they've sometimes struggled to hold those fourth quarter leads, sometimes struggle with those self-inflicted mistakes. But for the Chargers, we know it's the one-score games, and they've had trouble closing those out. So if it does get there, I think you feel a little more confident because the Chargers have just had that issue. But if you're the Ravens, you don't want to be the team that all of a sudden solves those Chargers fourth quarter one-score game woes, 100%. And you're known as, every other team can do it, but
you're the team that fixed them.
You're the team that can't do it. So I think that, if I had to make a prediction, I'd pick the Ravens in this one. I just think they're on a roll right now, and I know that they lost that Cleveland game a couple weeks ago, but depending on the injuries, again, we'll kind of see how that unfolds throughout the rest of the week. I think Friday is obviously the biggest day for that, but I think that for Baltimore, it's not a catastrophe if they lose it, but I think that this will be maybe a 9-point win for the Ravens, maybe a 27-18, like a weird score.
Weird score game.
Because the primetime games have potential. It's either like 40 to like 38, or they're really weird games. So I'll say like a 9-point Ravens win, but I think the Chargers have the talent, but I think to me it just comes down to the coaching, and we'll see if Brandon Staley maybe has a miracle in him, or if this will just be another Brandon Staley Chargers game.
Yeah, and that's what every game has been, it felt like, right? But I think you do have two teams going in opposite directions. Like, you have a streaking Ravens team with new coordinators who have seemed to put the right pieces around, who is a very solid head coach. And the success has been, what it's been, like 8-3. It's hard to attest that. Like, at this point, like you talked about, like, You are what you are. You are what your record says you are. And the Chargers' record says they're a 4-6 team. And when a 4-6 team is going up against an 8-3 team, obviously the Chargers, you could think, hey, probably not the normal amount of talent. It's definitely not the normal quarterback you see on a 4-6 team. I can tell you that right now. But they're going to have to pull all the stops, right? It's going to have to be an uber aggressive Brandon Staley. It's going to have to be a couple of breaks going their way, maybe a defensive score like you saw Cleveland get in that game, right? That's what it feels like. That's the recipe for success. It's going to take kind of a chaotic hurricane of things to happen for the Chargers to win this one, including getting out of their own way late in the game and finding a way to, put the dagger in a team, to be able to step on a team's throat, to be able to finish a game close at the end of things. So I'm excited for it. I mean, it's a chance for the Chargers to kind of have that shock the world moment. And it's a game where they go in as a house money team where there's not a ton of expectations. No one's really expecting them to win. Everyone's expecting him is going to pick them to lose. What are you going to do about it, right? What are these players going to do about it? How are they going to react to that? How are they going to react to being 4-6? All those things are in the balance. But Kevin, I'm super excited to watch it, man. Make sure you guys check out the Friday episode of Locked On Ravens with hopefully a full stomach of great Thanksgiving food. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, because I forgot to mention it at the top of the show. But Kevin, excited for everything, man. Hopefully everyone checks out Locked On Ravens on Friday, and hopefully we get a good matchup on Sunday Night Football. I know the country is going to be watching. We'll see which one of these teams shows how good they really are.
Major shout out to Daniel for his Chargers insight. And for more on Daniel's work, of course, you can check him out over on the Locked On Chargers podcast for the Chargers view of this Ravens and Chargers matchup. But that's all I have for you here today on this Thanksgiving edition episode of Locked On Ravens. Again, happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. Go enjoy the day. If you've already enjoyed it, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Football, friends, family, all the F's. That's what Thanksgiving's about. So thank you again for tuning in to Locked On Ravens. I hope that you have a great Thanksgiving. And coming up tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week with more Ravens content, continuing to preview that Ravens and Chargers matchup. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.